Uh, thanks a lot for being here. Thanks a lot to CGM for having me over here. It's already my third visit to PIT and to the center. I've learned a lot, and I'm very happy we even had a special issue where I could contribute with really new stuff that I learned at the center. So I'm kind of continuing working on these ideas that have been to which I was introduced here in my first visit. And this presentation is a continuation of developing and thinking about these ideas and the role of polycentricity in the crisis management. But before I start, question, how many of you have any background knowledge about Ukraine? So a few people. So I will have a bit of a background just to get you all in the same place regarding why I even use this this framework. So first of all, I would like to say that what I'm presenting is a result of a teamwork. This is the whole team that has been working at Kyiv School of Economics on it. We are working. It's a project that is supported by the Swedish International Center for Local Democracy, which specializes in also supporting local governments across the world in building democratic governance. And they also have a partnership program for Ukrainian and Swedish municipalities, and also Swedish municipalities and other municipalities in also Europe and beyond. And it's actually a great actor in also really doing very nurturing work in local democracy support. So this is our team, and here's the why this research. So as you all know, Russia went all in with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. It was a continuation of its invasion from 2014 and annexation of Crimea, and first hidden, but then also not hidden invasion of two regions in the east of Ukraine. So every day, Ukrainian population, the municipalities, they are exposed to really hard attacks. It is missiles, it is drones going against civilian infrastructure. There's destruction on almost every part of Ukraine is at risk of destructions at any moment in time. And in practice, it also means that local authorities, Ukrainian local self-governments, there are important actors in them dealing with all the crises that these attacks create. Because when there is a attack on a civilian infrastructure, like somewhere here, what is remained after the emergencies left is a lot of debris. There is a lot of displacement because people move from less safe to more safe parts of Ukraine. So there is millions of, like about 4 million people internally displaced. There is also attacks on critical infrastructure such as power plants and so electricity grid. The water supply. Ukraine has a lot of multi-story buildings. So when there's no electricity, there's no elevator for old people to get up and down. There is no water. And you cannot even cook because many have electrical stoves. So there is a lot of crises that happen because of what's going on. So when I talk about crisis, I talk about these war-caused crises, not the war itself. So. And in this situation, we look at local governments who deal with these crises. So I will first present a theoretical puzzle regarding the system of governance, which is the debate in the literature about whether polycentricity or monocentricity is better at dealing with crisis. Then I'll present our research question and approach, theoretical approach, methods, and then our results and the discussion. So this is what exactly I learned at the center and started to think a lot about is the debates between the polycentrists and monocentrists, so to say. So that is an old discussion between these consolidationists who say that a very vertically integrated centralized government can use economies of scale to provide public goods. That and also the argument for consolidation is that when there's too much decentralization, that there could be competition for resources and authority in the solving of crisis, so a lot of chaos. And there's evidence from COVID dealing that it is also the case. And that can create crisis response very slow and uncoordinated. But when we read polycentric literature, we see that there are certain perks in the decentralized governance, especially because like this crisis that I described, it actually has very local repercussions every time it happens. So this, since the crisis is heterogeneous, then a response could be more context specific if it is decided locally. Plus, you can use the advantages of co-production with the community who can help you solve the crisis because they have knowledge and maybe resources also. So that is about this proximity between the citizens and the authority in the community, which is smaller. And if there is a collaborative governance and information loops, coordination between levels of governance, it actually should be, coordination can still occur, and then we solve this particular problem. So with this debate in mind, we were thinking about Ukraine, because Ukraine, with all the discussion, and we can take about, how polycentricity is decentralization, Ukraine has moved from a more centralized multi-level governance to a more decentralized by creating more local self-government authorities in the local units, which have the powers to solve the social problems, the economic development issues at the local level. They have their own guaranteed share of tax revenue, so they do have resources, which they did not have, or not all of them had before their reforms. And so these decentralization reforms, they started in 2014, and at the local level, they were completed by 2020. So Ukraine faced the Russian invasion as a more decentralized state. Then we had the reform was actually 3 reforms. So there was amalgamation. It has gains for efficiency of governance. There's political dimension when, again, these important social services became responsibility of local self-government. And this, when I say self-government, I say it on purpose because it's elected. So we have elected mayors and elected councillors every 5 years. And fiscal, it is this thing about having your own share of personal income tax, which is like the most important part of taxation for Ukraine. Plus, Ukraine was going through the digital transformation with more services available in digital form. And basically, even though we don't, of course, have an ideal polycentric system, we had a move towards more empower these centers at the level of Hromada. And so I think of the whole system at the local level as a network of these Hromadas, which makes it as a polycentric system. But of course, because of the war, Ukraine introduced martial law, so some things changed. There is no electoral accountability. You cannot have elections. The direct democracy mechanisms like referenda are not possible. Also certain limitations on public gatherings. Although when I look at those limitations, I can see that they are even more lax than in Germany. So but for Ukraine, we'd say it is an increased limitation. Transparency requirements were lowered, and we have now military administration instead of state administrations with increased powers in areas, for example, social services and, of course, military parts, which had not been the case before for the state administrations. So with this background, and with the Ukrainian context as an empirical manifestation of polycentricity, we ask the question, how do the mechanisms of polycentricity sustain the crisis response of Ukrainian municipalities? So here I want to say that I'm not making an argument that because of decentralization, Ukraine was able to better solve the crisis because of the war, because we don't have this alternative. All municipalities had the same powers at the time, but still we observe that this context has certain mechanisms that make it apparently withstand for now like three full years almost. So these three mechanisms we identified based on the literature: facilitation of local knowledge, resource mobilization, and enablement of experimenting and innovation. I can go, if you want, later in more detail in a question, why these three. Our methodology. So we have surveys. We have conducted two surveys of Ukrainian local authorities, one in 2022 and another in 2024, early 2024. These are two research projects, actually. So one of them was with the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe, which is a political organization of governments in the whole European continent. And the second one we did with our Swedish partners, ICLD. But in a nutshell, we have 181 local self-government authorities surveyed in 2024. This is the distribution between regions. And in total, we have slightly more than 1,400 local authorities. So you can understand our response rate is not too bad. And in 2022, we have 241. And also our sample is not super big cities. So our sample is mostly smaller communities of 50,000 people, also urban and rural means. So these are not the most resourceful actors in Ukraine. What is also important, we conducted in 2022, we had interviews and focus group, and we had some interviews in 2024. So this is a mixed design. Okay, so I will now go presenting the results one by one with these mechanisms. Also, one word about our operationalization. So when we talk about facilitation of knowledge, we use the framework of the Council of Europe, which defines different levels of citizen participation. So how citizens can be part of local governance. And that's why we have several levels, starting from information. And thanks for the water. In our this is a survey results demonstrating a dynamic in how local authorities informed certain stakeholders about what was important for them as a crisis. So a lot of Ukrainian municipalities ranked internal displacement as the most burning crisis they were solving with their community together. So we find that there was, for example, a big increase in the role of entrepreneurs already in 2022. So they became important stakeholders whom local authorities tried to keep informed about their problems in a hope for solution. Then we also have a slight increase between 2022 and 2024 of internally displaced people themselves. So again, Ukrainian authorities think about these beneficiaries as part of the solution. How they did it? They use channels like social media, websites, chatbots, very common, using Telegram, which is not super safe. And also there was a adaptation because Ukrainian municipalities have learned to use digital maps to show whatever they have, like schools, hospitals in their municipality, and some adapted them to marked bomb shelters. And as I already mentioned, we also have some data from 2021 regarding information of these groups, and we saw that entrepreneurs and internally displaced people are the new audiences that local authorities see. Then there is a next level of how knowledge can be circulating. So not just one way of informing, but now this is the next level about consultation. consultation we operationalize is when local authority comes to the stakeholder to ask, or when the stakeholder proactively comes to the local authority and consult with me. And we see here interesting dynamics. So I will try to walk you through. So first of all, we saw that again, IDP, internally displaced people and entrepreneurs, they become key groups from which local authorities seek in. We see here entrepreneurs and IDPs, especially here, and where this is when this stakeholder requested, and when local authority invited them for consultation, that was much bigger change. In entrepreneurs, for example, look from 2021 to 2022. It looked like, guys, let's meet and see what can we do. Then this is dynamic from 2022. But in 2024, we already see a bit of an ease in that. Because, for example, the entrepreneurs, they're still important, but it is not that local authorities so proactively come to them. But IDPs, even more. So how we interpret the data is that local authorities, there's some sort of professionalization. So some businesses are involved already routinely in certain consultations, and then there is no need to ask more, but internally displaced people are raising more and more their demand to be part of the solution, and the local authorities are actually responding to it. How does this happen? One of the tools, which is more formal, is the IDP councils. This is an Ukrainian, actually, one of the Ukrainian NGOs, this in Colombia, and started to implement this already since 2014 in the first wave of this. Back in the day, they said people looked at us like, you nuts, we only have like 1.5 million people of displaced for a 40 million country. So it didn't look like such a huge problem. But this solution, it became more used now. And in this, and even though this year the government made it even mandatory to create this, local authorities in Ukraine created these councils voluntarily before, because they saw that we have this group of people that really want to do something, then we should do something cooperating them. And they need, the thing is that the needs of IDPs are so immense that no government or central authority can't really do it alone. So it's good that local authorities started to play. Then we also have the other, the next level is like a dialogue. It is a dialogue because in consultation, this is still a bit of a one way. So if you think we give you some input or we request some input. Dialogue is already when there is an ongoing conversation. Dialogue is characterized by responsiveness to feedback. That's why we not just asked about exchange of views, but we asked about whether the stakeholders' arguments influence the decision. And look, for example, how the role of entrepreneurs, NGOs, move it from peacetime to wartime, continue to be rather high, even though went a bit down. And IDPs are again growing even higher. But there is, remember that we have asked, so all of this is about the most burden issue, which for most municipalities was internal displacement. So it looks like communities are really solving the problems with people who are usually just beneficiaries. They are part of the solution. Also, we know from our qualitative research is that this feedback is also very much sourced from social media. So they really look and monitor what people say in social media. Is the mayor good or bad? Is this particular solution good or bad? And then they react accordingly. Not all of them, but let's say this is generally, let's say, a trend. And another thing what has been changing is that in 2022, experts lost a lot of relevance. So experts are people who are hired for money to give us the good In 2022, I was standing here talking about democratization of knowledge because you didn't have to be an expert to help organize the logistics of I don't know, bumpers from A to B. If you said I know how to do it, welcome. Here is this room. We sit all here in the local authority and we organize the logistics. But in 2024, again, professionalization is happening, and so we see experts are getting it again back on track. Without losing the role of the non-net. This is one of the cases. It is not about the thermal displacement. It's another big issue is what to do with the municipalities that have experienced a lot of damage from the facilities from the Russian direct attacks. This is a case of a smaller municipality in the Kyiv region, so around the capital of Ukraine, where they held a multi-stakeholder dialogue over 1 year. Imagine, during the war, there is a multi-stakeholder workshops trying to get relevant stakeholders to think about how do we revitalize a part of the community. And they even reached out to veterans, a group which is typically very hard to mobilize to cooperate with the rest of the community. This is a case of also the solution itself was a co-production. So we have like a double co-production actually, because the solution of holding this workshop came from construction company helped by architectural association who came to this local authority and said, look, we have this method, how about we try? And the local authority was like, yes. When the deputy mayor was talking at KIC, he said after he tried this, he doesn't believe in any other types of citizen participation. This is like the one correct. So that's what is about knowledge. So summing up the previous part, so we saw the polycentricity argument goes that you have local units which have contextual knowledge, which can be mobilized in crisis. And we actually saw in the case of Ukraine is that groups like local entrepreneurs, internally displaced people themselves, local civic initiatives, they stepped in towards the local authorities to help them with solving many issues on the ground. They did not wait any directions from the center. Coming to the next mechanism is resource mobilization. So here we talk about really like getting material resources to solve the problems. And we asked the local authorities about the reasons why they introduced citizen participation. Coordinating supply and demand for help was one of the top answers in 2022, and it remained quite important in 2024. Attracting external resources. So this is a question we actually asked in 2021 as well. It was a bit of a coincidence that we asked about it. But we saw that in 2022, the proportion of municipalities who said that they do citizen participation to attract resources grew by 33 percentage points. Again, it remained very stable. And meeting the needs of vulnerable groups. So the needs are so big that they have to acquire resources from the outside of their local government budget in order to solve this. At the same time, there used to be in 2022 very high response about coordination of volunteers, that it was a goal, because so volunteers in the case of Ukraine are active citizens and organizations who put it on themselves to do things like supply the army with drones, supply the IDPs with everything that they need, and do any other supportive activity, actually to maintain statehood. And we saw that these volunteers, again, they started to professionalize and they don't need the local authority anymore to coordinate them. Plus, of course, the war takes toll. I will talk about this on cooperation. So we saw a decline in this particular function. And in part, what I already started to allude to, but here I would like to specifically say that we saw, so we understand co-production is that the non-governmental stakeholders, they bring in their resources, actual, money or in kind, and time to actually deliver the solution. So we had the similar question in 2021. So we saw an increase in percentage of municipalities who said that they involve stakeholders in implementation, almost for every category of stakeholders. Actually, entrepreneurs, and especially just some residents. Practice, for example, this is how a volunteer hub in Novovolets booked in 2022. It was organized on the premises of the local authority. So I was there in September 2022. It wasn't already so crowded. But this was it is a western city of Ukraine, which is close to the border. So in order to organize logistics of humanitarian goods and some supply to the army for the east part of Ukraine, this was like a coordination hub. And it was, managed and done by people who are not public authorities themselves. So the mayors gave the blessing. There will be some people who are from the respected departments, but a lot of communication with foreigners, doing Excel sheets to report what was transported and so on. That was done by people who were like internally displaced people themselves or locals from that town. Much more, we have more a lot of other cases of production. For example, IT industry in Lviv was developing training software for the air defense guys for the western part of Ukraine. So a lot of examples. And also the third mechanism, and why the resource mobilization? So the logic here is that because you have these empowered hromadas, everyone knows everyone, and the authorities there, they also know whom they can ask for what resources. And the people also feel the commitment to help, because there is more trust at the when this is a neat communities, more empowered to solve their problems. So that is why we think that this polycentricity is a good way of to think about what's going on. The third is that when you have this separate decision-making units, they all try to solve kind of the same but slightly different problem, but they come with different solutions, and this is where innovation is born, where the big center may not be able to innovate so much, and you have experimentation plus municipalities all talk to each other so they can share the solution, and then over time the better solution survives and gets multiplied on the rest. And we see this, for example, in occupied Ukrainian municipalities. Mariupol was occupied already in spring 2022, but the local authority did not disperse. It moved. Then it also created centers of support for their own residents in different cities of Ukraine. These support centers were created on the basis of pre-existing municipal one of the municipal departmental units. So we have here this innovation in that there was institutional adaptation to functioning and providing public services to your residents in exile, so to say, in other parts of Ukraine. We asked, we had several occupied municipalities in our sample, so we asked how do they communicate still with their residents. For example, they still run community pages, they have official website, they have created database of community contacts, so they maintain this communication, and some involve their residents in planning what will be after their liberation, for example. So yeah, we had like just 20, so but it's already quite a lot. And then this Mariupol was a good initiative, and Melitopol, another occupied city, it's sort of took the same approach because they were able to see what's going on. So these are these three mechanisms of polycentricity which we think are at play. But since these mechanisms all rely on what we call in political science public engagement. And the thing is that during the war, there are challenges to that. But what is interesting is that it is less different than we thought peace times, but it's still the war exacerbates what is anyway a typical challenge to do community outreach and public engagement. So, for example, we saw that ensuring active citizen participation, when people are engaged in all of this, became really difficult for 40% of our sample, which was in the peacetime, it was just 11. Say making sure that it's inclusive. I mean, I wouldn't call it a big dynamic here. And ensuring constructive dialogue also. Because what happens, and that's reflected here, is that you have, of course, a case of different war experiences. Almost everyone had to move, maybe some of your family died, and someone is still in their home, even though it's both very dangerous. Trauma, displacement, so all these experiences, they exacerbate what is already difficult to do. And also our respondents, they said that there are certain negative consequences from all this public engagement in this, it's like a bubbling pot. So there is emotional stress for all involved, and also overload of responsible employees. So imagine you have a displacement, your employees maybe are gone, but you have even more demands being communicating, reaching out because you need resources and knowledge. So there is a lot of overload, and there some we saw a little bit of starting to. What I worry about is the excessive politicization of community issues. Again, it's just like on the background of the war-related trauma and stress. So to conclude, I wanted to keep it short so you could ask questions. So here several observations about the role of polycentricity and resilience during war. That when we had a decentralization reform and it created empowered municipalities, at least it did not impede the crisis. We cannot say it is decentralization is the reason for the capability to respond, but it's at least not an obstacle. So, and we saw a lot of examples that it creates context-specific response opportunities. Second is that we saw a lot of evidence. There's three mechanisms of polycentricity: facilitation of local knowledge, mobilization of resources, and this experimentation and innovation. We saw them in practice in the survey response, but also in interviews focus groups. So we see that polycentricity actually supports crisis response in practice. Also, we find limits to polycentric governance because all war reduces because of its strain on the psychological resilience of people. It of course reduces the capacity of all involved stakeholders to participate in this constant knowledge and resource exchange and co-production. That's why at least a short-term solution is creating some spaces where these actors communicate, can solve the conflicts, and prioritize technology that uses communication. This is, of course, would be just a short-term solution because the only long-term solution is sustainable peace and security. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. My name is Ali. I work here at the Center for Governance and Markets. I really enjoyed the talk. One question I had was, so in terms of like the main crisis under study in your paper, the Ukraine war is the main source of it, but I think the displacement of people is kind of like the main sort of crisis that you're kind of looking at. And I was wondering if you know is like the particular nature of that kind of crisis, is that maybe what contributes to why a polycentric approach to managing it, is, it ends up working in this particular case, when people are displaced, it kind of affects everyone. It affects the businesses, they lose potential talent pool, people lose potential opportunities. It just causes general miscoordination in the entire system. Is this just a particular kind of conflict that just tends to align preferences on a large scale in a way that just kind of facilitates this? And you know, what is kind of like the external validity to that? Does kind of your analysis extend to other kinds of crises that war may generate, not necessarily displacement of people? And then just one other quick thing, one thought I had, on the three different mechanisms you had for polycentricity, to what degree can you think of, all three of them arising from just kind of an argument that it seems like in this particular case, it's really knowledge utilization that seems to be what the polycentric system is leveraging here, whether it be through collecting data about experimentation, or through knowing knowing where to allocate resources more efficiently based on just generating convening spaces for people to exchange information. To what degree is this, could we think of this as just, a situation in which it seems like polycentricity might just improve information flow, which affects various aspects of the crisis response protocol?
I think I'll respond, and so I can take one question and respond. So regarding external validity, we do have so ITP or displacement crisis was the most selected problem that Ukrainian municipalities in our survey solved by involving the community, but there were actually others. There were like damage to the infrastructure, but mostly humanitarian. So I would agree here that definitely anything that's humanitarian is likely more easier to be solved with involving the citizens, because it requires less technical knowledge and so on. At the same time, knowing how Ukrainian volunteer movement has been supplying the army and how different units of Ukrainian armed forces are like in a bit of separate universes. For example, we have brigades that have their own information campaigns, that they have own hiring systems, own promotion, and own supply systems. I think it's not only the humanitarian that lends itself to polycentricity. And there is a good paper about polycentric defense on Ukraine, polycentric defense of Ukraine, which describes how this is functioning in the military. Also, specialists in electricity, for example, they're talking a lot about the decentralized grid. So I think that is more. Question is then, of course, you have lower or you have narrower groups of people who are involved, and then how do you define center of authority, how much authority at which level? But I think this defense example is a good argument for some sort of external validity of these findings. And regarding whether polycentricity is just, if I understood correctly, whether it's just sort of not creates this mechanism, but rather empowers them. Is this your question?
Yeah, it's more kind of like, is it really just, is the story mainly just information flow?
Honestly, I think most policy problems is the information flow, right?
Yeah.
But of course, in order to solve particular crisis, then when it comes down to also resources, like you have a housing solution. For example, one example I didn't note is in one of the regions of Ukraine, the regional authority, regional council, gathered a smaller council where all mayors of that region were present, where they decided how will they distribute housing in the people who need it, and where, so they established the system of collecting information about available housing and then giving it to the people, collecting information about who needs the housing, who has the housing, and then dispersing. So in the end, it was actually very hard to disentangle knowledge sharing, circulation, and utilization of resources, even when I was reading the literature on polycentricity. How I made it, the distinction for me is whether there was involved a product, for example, if it's about we attract resources rather than we just map who can give us the resources. So I would say it looks more like resource mobilization, although of course it's like a next step after information. Martin.
Great, thanks so much for the presentation. Apart from these three factors which are important in polycentrism, there's another factor which is competition. Local authorities will be incentivized to deliver efficient services to the customers or to the people and local communities in order to attract more taxes, for example, for the principle that vote by feet. Otherwise, if you do not provide them, they will move out of your jurisdiction. So in times of crisis, how do you see this competition play out between these local communities? Because crisis requires administrators and authorities to cooperate rather than compete. I don't know whether you have looked at competition or not. That's one. And another question. The set of rules which defines the relationship between all these jurisdictions, the Oromots, is that evolving continuously in the last 2 years, or for example, also how does it define the relationship between these government agencies with NGOs, entrepreneurs that you have studied? Because in a polycentric system, it's not just government institutions, but you bring in private sector, NGOs, civil society, all of them collaborating to provide services.
Oh, well, great questions. On competition, we saw especially competition in resource mobilization, and it had both positive and not so positive and negative consequences, because on the one hand, competition between Hromada, for example, many businesses from the eastern part of Ukraine had to relocate because, for example, their premises were destroyed and they decided to start anew. So the question is, where will they relocate? Some municipalities took it upon themselves to advertise and like they thought of it as a market for where will the relocated enterprise actually come. And they promoted themselves via social media. They created certain perks. For example, they would, one case that I'm describing now, they reached out to a particular type of enterprise because they said, look, we have a college that also trains the furniture makers. Come to us, we will give you this hangar where you can be, which created attention because the municipalities from which they were relocating, they felt like they're a bit left, you know, not like they wanted more solidarity in a sense, although it's not so clear cut here what is solidarity and what is not, because the enterprises were to move anyway. So competition here was more like trying to get the relocated enterprises into your municipality, not some. Often there is a massive competition for international funding in the municipal partnerships. Again, there is only very few municipalities by themselves, for example, cooperate with more disadvantaged municipalities to bring them also into a partnership with, let's say, some Western municipality. I think in the past half a year, I saw the attempts of the Office of the President of all places to facilitate trilateral partnerships so that a very damaged municipality in the eastern part of Ukraine partnering with a municipality in western part of Ukraine and their partners somewhere in Europe. We created this trilateral partnership. So it looks like polycentricity does come to its limits when you need to improve the well-being of the whole system. And people need special skills to be able to define the win as a collective payoff and not just their own here. So I see here this, there are certain advantages because they compete and they try to create better conditions for businesses, for example, which is good for them. But then larger scale, I think there's a limitation. This also external actors can overcome it. Like it was an initiative of Office of the President, but also the NGOs who facilitate cooperation. They also are able to overcome this bit animosity. And there is a municipal partnerships initiatives in Ukraine over environmental issue. Like if you have a big river, right, and these river municipalities, they are also cooperating to create more tourism opportunities. So we see both standards. The second question regarding the scope of rules, which have whether they have changed in the past 2 years, that determine the cooperation between the actors. So yes, there is a post-martial law. There are certain cuts on limitations on transparency. So sometimes some municipalities may close off their meetings, or you don't know when they're happening, so you don't know what's going on. So this has been changing. There has been changes in the vertical, especially painful for municipalities was the financial, that part of the personal income tax of the military personnel doesn't go to the municipality anymore. Goes straight to the government to finance the army. That was a big it was a big hit for the budgets of the municipality. The rules have changed, but again, it's a really polycentric system because they are being negotiated. The particular rule with taxes, they failed in negotiating, but others, for example, there's a new law being made about oversight from the administrations or from municipalities. This is now being quite actively negotiated with participation of reanimation package of reforms, which is association of NGOs, right? Oh, sorry, I apologize because you were next and then you were after Omar and then.
Yeah, thank you, Oleksandra, for such an interesting presentation about the polycentric mechanism in crisis response. So my question is quite closely related to the prior one, and it's about the impact of this mechanism, polycentric mechanism, on transparency, again, broadly defined in Ukraine. So in your study, did you observe that this approach, this polycentric approach, actually had some positive or negative impact on transparency, or maybe corruption, right? So did it promote more opportunities for corruption, or was it generally beneficial for greater transparency within the regions?
So the interesting thing is that the anti-corruption movement and increased transparency of municipalities before the full-scale invasion, in my observation, enabled this cooperative response and community engagement, because over the course of 6+ years, there was a move to open citizen participation in decision making. There were participatory budgets created, electronic petitions. It was generally becoming fashionable to be open, transparent, participatory, and at the same time, Ukrainian municipalities delivered a lot of participatory innovations that was globally recognized. And by the time the big crisis hit, there was in many, not all, not 100%, but in many municipalities, there was this passion of trust that helped them react quickly. And there was the way of communicating with between, for example, entrepreneurs and the local authority, because they had previous, regular meetings with mayor, or churches would be having church breakfasts with other interested citizens and so on. So the anti-corruption and transparency in my causal chain, they're actually preceding the functioning of these mechanisms, and polycentricity, like the decentralization reform, enabled that. And we see that, for example, this is research by also a colleague from Kyiv School of Economics, Timothy Brick, and his team, that showed that public trust to local authorities increased after the decentralization. Now, of course, when there has been this massive participation of non-governmental stakeholders, they are also demanding more stake. And by observation from another study, it is a demand for fair rules of the game, even on the municipal level. So one particular municipality in Rivne region, it is home to 4 agricultural firms. And as the mayor explained, each firm previously wanted just to get more preferable conditions for themselves. His job, he saw it as trying to mitigate them all. And only now they started to appreciate that he is being neutral to them. Like he's having the same rule set for them, because they all could keep their business in the war. So there is a lot of still work to be done, and but the participation of non-state stakeholders in crisis response makes them more demanding for transparency, for anti-corruption, and there is an ongoing movement to improve, for example, conditions and rules for participation in recovery and reconstruction for NGOs. There are certain regulations being constantly negotiated.
Thank you. Really incredible work. And the keys. And I think I can play somewhat of a devil's advocate here, and I specialize in authoritarian regimes. So my main question is coming from the comparison with China and like the arguments about responsiveness and like local representation document. Like there are a number of studies by Reuters who basically find that responsiveness at the level of China. And like some of the most fundamental explanations are tied to like community bonds, the community ties, like ethnic or like Molesky's argument about like signaling to the rest of the world that like give us your money because we're great, we actually don't have corruption here going on. So and considering that you originally outlined the important argument that there are no like electoral sanctions, considering like invasion and everything going on, it makes sense. But for responsiveness work in democracies, we need electoral sanctions. And that's why those like China-based arguments, they have to like get around the bush and say like, yeah, responsiveness could be there under autocracies when we don't have elections. So I think I kind of like want you to kind of consider that connection between like democracy, non-democracy, electoral sanctioning, and like responsiveness, because at the moment, the argument that you're proposing and the evidence you provide, it's very much persuasive. But if there is someone who does like authoritarian regimes in the room, like to me, it doesn't like, I don't see the difference in democracy, non-democracy, and like, I'm kind of not buying into like what you present as being the sign of democracy. There is like research that shows the same outcomes under like no elections, like no electoral sanction. I would encourage you to think about that mechanism to like push your audience to buy into why it is a democratic process. And like, I do believe that you have like pieces to put things together and like convince your audience. And for example, consider like whether it's a unitary or like Ukraine is a unitary state, and like kind of like explain what's going on with Texas and like why like I know like people might have more say in terms of like how to allocate resources, despite the fact that it's like a unitary state. So I believe there are a lot of different options, but I would try to pin this point down because we want to make a message of democracy.
Thanks for this note. I'm aware, of course, of this whole debate that responsiveness, especially at the local level in authoritarian regime, is authoritarian regime because it supports the support for whatever regime that allows the responsiveness. So it doesn't matter. And I think that is like a limitation we'll have to live with, also normatively saying, like we have to accept that authoritarian regime is not necessarily an unresponsive regime. And actually, we should find if we are normatively inclined that democracy is a better form of governance, we should all actively look for arguments beyond responsiveness that will support that claim, especially now in the authoritarian populist turn all over Western world. In my case, I talk about in the article, I talk about the democratic preconditions for this particular mechanisms, and also in case of Ukraine, you need a bit more context because Ukraine used to be a very long time in the Soviet Union, where there was no even citizen participation itself was a lot of fake and mock, and it was this regarded. And in the post-Soviet Ukraine, what happened is the diversion. So the normal was that the citizens are separate and the state is separate. And only what started to change after 2014, with a lot of participatory tools being introduced at the local level, the citizens started to sort of mix in with the state representatives, creating coalitions of change in things like from local anti-corruption. Like for example, I looked with another project together with my team. We looked at anti-corruption reforms at the local level in Ukraine between 2010, depends on the case, until 2019. So we saw that only through participation and creating of coalitions between NGOs and businesses and local authorities, they were able to shift the governance towards more integrity. So in the case of Ukraine, I'm not arguing that this particular crisis response is democratic, but that the democratic preconditions in this particular case, they enable the crisis response to use this polycentricity, because there was some sort of basic trust at the local level, which emerged from the democratic transformation, away from a more authoritarian, separated existence of state and authority and the people. But I also have to admit that I don't know, maybe authoritarian regimes that are responsive enough, they are able to deliver on the also polycentric response at the local level. I just don't know. Would be interesting if someone does kind of research.
So I'm not an academic, I'm a local journalist, and your point in your presentation, under martial law in Ukraine right now, is that even authoritarianism light? Is that, if you were to say, we're having the system, we're in war, we have a temporary authoritarian government because of martial law? It's not China exactly, and there's people are still involved, but I'm bridging what you said with your presentation. Would you consider We would, what is martial law?
Can I go, because martial law, the martial law is a set of restrictions on some of their basic rights. For example, the right for movement. Ukrainian men cannot, of conscription age, cannot travel abroad unless they have certain conditions. Unless they meet certain conditions, including by the way, my research colleagues. If they're going to a conference, they can go. So they return, and we have had this practice. So again, this is not an authoritarian state of Soviet Union, which bans everyone because they are not loyal to go abroad. There's certain criteria, you fulfill them, you go. Second, elections are not allowed. I am not a big proponent of the whole conceptualization of democracy through elections only. Authoritarian regimes hold elections left and right, and let's say not much happening. So elections are good. You need renovation of power and elites, obviously, but this is not a sole criteria. Another aspect of martial law is limitations like for example, local authorities who are too close to the front lines, they cannot announce when they have a meeting. Because let's say it's just dangerous. If they have, for example, a broadcasting, then it is very easy for Russia to know who is sitting there and hit the button. So they are not doing it. Of course, it limits the right of people to know what's going on, to participate. But even under these conditions, many frontline municipalities, they have a recording which they publish immediately after they have had a sitting. Also, there are Zoom, for example, in a lot of commissions in Kharkiv, they happen over Zoom, and you can also join. And I think that is the difference to authoritarian regime, because even under the martial law, the non-limitations, the real security threats, which are not imaginary, like it flies down on people's heads, the municipal authorities, enough of municipal authorities look for ways to still involve the citizens. My university, so we organized a meeting for our partner municipalities under the question, Nenachas. So is participation actually timely at time? And these municipalities came to us and said, of course, what are you asking about? But please help us to make it so that it works and that we can, be more efficient with that and how to. And they had a lot of. They raised the question of legitimacy because they said, since we can't have elections, we want to be, to show to people we're open, to listen to them, to avoid social bursts, to increase social cohesion. And that was their request to us. And they really appreciated that we let them in sort of exchange their solutions for making citizen participation possible under martial law and the war. Maybe last point, Transparency International Ukraine is doing annual assessment of transparency. So they had the report even in 2022, 23. So, and the report for 2024 says that even where the transparency shrank, there were already improvements in certain areas despite the martial law. And it does not, and let's say the being close to the front lines does not explain the progress, which it means that some municipalities really believe in the legitimacy and so on. They are really making effort to increase participation opportunity, even if they're close to the front.
To get to some fundamentally, like you heard Politics 101, there is like representative and there's direct democracy. And what Ukraine does direct democracy, like Athens. People would meet and talk and argue and fight, etc. It does not translate to like the higher level of governance for representatives because martial law, but they're still kind of like managing things directly and like allocating resources. So I asked you about like fiscal stuff.
I would like to, there are different ways of how to define this. So I tend to think of what's going on as a participatory democracy, and actually that the input translates. That is the thing. So the peculiarity of Ukrainian democracy is that we have lots of, for example, public, think of it, there is a public council at the Bureau for Economic Security. It is like the most feared bureau that looks at economic crime. There are a lot of issues about it. So, but the anti-corruption NGOs are now part of this council, which gives direction to the how to reform it. And we have lots of these kind of councils at the local level, but also at the different national agencies. We have election. We now have a selection process for the Supreme Court. So there is civil society representatives are looking at the integrity characteristics of the candidates. They give this to the selection committee. The committee consists partially of Ukrainian and partially of international representatives, and also through international representatives, it's possible to vet candidates that are not that have made decisions under severe conflict of interest. So Ukraine is developing this I don't know, call it participatory, call it corporatist governance, but these models are there is a way of feedback loops towards the higher levels of governance from the lower and from the civil society. Actually, recently the president even held a big meeting with civil society organizations, which has not happened in 3 years. And it was again because they listened to demand, even though it is not maybe happening in such, this super organized way where we have regular monthly calls or something like that.
I mean, I think these are great questions. I think on the one hand, I'm listening, like maybe like a paper at some point in time, like federalism, style, because that's how federalist papers.
Unitary.
But I mean, and you're saying it's unitary, but if it's polycentric, like China, there's a pretty famous paper on like federalism, Chinese style federalism. And everybody's like, all the experts on China are like, China's not federal. But it's a very famous paper. So you don't actually have to like get all the details right. But I think the polycentrism you're describing that is a characteristic of a federation. And I think like all these questions about like, all right, what about autocracy? I know Darkovich has written a lot on the local military. And that's on part of the monocentric system. And where those local military administrations, in some cases, basically the local mayors become the head of the LMA, right? That's a centralized or monocentric. And I think if you did want to look at like, is there a difference in the quality of governance? That would be, your co-authors have written a lot more on the element. You're like the kind of like doing break. You're like the polycentric, like, and then like when I was reading Andrei's work, I'm like, all right, like it's very concerned about local military administrations, crisis, and loss of reform. So, and you don't have to get in. I mean, obviously, you don't have to get into that here, but I just think it's all there. If you included that, basically that in Ukraine, you want to say what's happening at the local level, but it's not, doesn't have that polycentric aspect. The local military administrations are. And I think that they've done the studies looking at like some studies on citizens that when you have both like the kind of local military administration plus the kind of pre-existing promata, that people are a little confused. Who should be providing the services? And I think that would actually get to this point without actually having to do a full comparative like China versus Ukraine. I mean, we want to think about these comparisons, but I think within Ukraine, that can be, I think, something we need to leverage to basically address this point. How do we know this is working? To improve quality of governance.
I think so. Our survey is only among self-government, so we don't know the systematically. So indeed, Andrei had this with his colleagues about communication between state. Between oblast military administrations and local military administrations and local self-government authorities. It can be interesting to see, really to compare crisis response capacity, I guess, between the two.